Ivy Slater, and you're listening to Her Success Story Podcast, a show where gutsy businesswomen share their success journey. Hi, it's Ivy Slater, and welcome to this episode of Her Success Story. I am blown away with today's guest. I don't even know where to begin to introduce her, so I'm going to do a very light introduction. Pandwe Gibson, also known as Dr. Gibson, and for those who know her well, Pandwe. She is the president and founder of EcoTech Visions, a business maker incubator focused on deepening the innovation ecosystems to include light manufacturing and production firms. She has done things in the school system. She is brilliant with a degree from Scripps, a leadership program at Harvard, went on to work at MIT. She can drop names with the best of them. She has a PhD from Claremont, a brilliant woman. One of the things right now that really Pandwe blew me away with is not just how she built this company, which is a learning lesson of itself, and I look forward to you sharing that with us today, but also what we're seeing in the world right now and what's going on and how this is touching supply chains and how we can all learn from this. So we have a lot to talk about. Might not be our average Her Success Story interview. It's going to be even better. Pandwe, thanks for joining us here. Dr. Gibson, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
So share with us the, I love when you shared with me earlier, the impetus to actually get started on this, because it was from a personal impact. It was from a life-altering, which is a little bit what we're living right now, a life-altering moment that we never forget. And that gave you the momentum. I have to say, I keep telling everybody, what we're living right now is to see possibility and opportunity and a vision for the future. And so share how Ecosystems was first formed in your incubator mind.
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for having me on your show. It's a real honor and a treat for me to be here today. I got started as a result of Hurricane Katrina. So my entire adult life was shaped by that, those moments. I'm from New Orleans. My mom, my grandmother, my brother, everybody had to flee. And I watched my entire community not just lose their homes, people lose their lives, but also lose their citizenship overnight, right? They were calling New Orleanians refugees immediately after the storm. And a couple things became so clear to me. And I was 22 when the storm hit. I definitely thought I had all the answers, but I was smart enough to know that nobody would listen to me at 22 with degrees from California. So I applied to Harvard, went to a leadership program at Harvard, and while there, wrote the framework for my first startup, which ended up being a network of schools called Renew, ultimately. So I moved back to New Orleans after finishing my master's and PhD and focused on developing out Renew. We opened 16 schools over the course of 3 years.
Whoa, hold on. That is wild. I'm a numbers woman. When we look at these numbers, 16 schools in 3 years as a young woman with a startup, that's a woman who knows how to go out and get funding. That's a woman who knows how to ask. That's a huge step in leadership and how you do things and build a business.
Yeah, it was post-Katrina New Orleans. And to be honest with you, I literally was doing what I was trained to do. I'm a good cook. I know how to follow recipes. Harvard gave me a recipe and I just tunnel vision implemented it because, there was nothing in New Orleans post-Katrina. We took over buildings that were condemned by FEMA and there were still children quote unquote learning in them, with holes going from the third floor to the first floor, just covered by a piece of plywood. I mean, there wasn't a choice but to accelerate growth, and to be effective and to provide a quality framework. And that framework was science-based. That's my background. It was data-based. I actually want to add a caveat just to add context for who I am. So I'm the granddaughter of the first Black regional director for the IRS of the Midwest region. His name is Kenneth Gibson Sr. And his wife, my grandmother, Mamie Gibson, and her sister, Evelyn Gaston, worked on the Manhattan Project, which, as you know, is the founding of atomic energy. So
Wow.
I come from scientists, and I come from people who are financially prudent.
You come from a smart heritage of people who are willing, and your heritage is about stepping into the innovative space and not just following the line.
Exactly.
But breaking those rules, being an innovator yourself.
Yes, I'm trying to stand on their shoulders and make them proud, definitely.
And you are, I'm sure. I can tell you that. As a parent, not a grandparent yet, but as a parent with adult children, that's something to be said.
Thank you.
So you built out 16 schools, 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, check, and check. What's next?
So I was recruited to DC to do the work across DC, Philadelphia, and it seemed like this great opportunity that I couldn't say no to. So I moved to DC, but within 6 months of being in DC, one of my children in New Orleans was murdered, one of my students from my school. And that was completely devastating, because in the entire time that I had been in the field, I had never lost a child, and that was saying something major given the contexts that I was in. And it was devastating. But it taught me
so it was another life-altering moment.
Definitely.
And in life-altering moments come the decisions to move into what's next for us.
Definitely. So I had 2 major epiphanies from that experience. One, you can't help children if you don't create economic opportunities for the adults in their life. It's not sustainable. And 2, there's absolutely no reason to teach children the periodic table if the only jobs available in the economy are service jobs. So why know AG is silver if you're just going to press a picture of a burger on a machine? And so it became very critical to me to look at where I could utilize my skill for scaling to implement change in a more systemic, sustainable, effective fashion. And advanced manufacturing sort of emerged as the vehicle. At the time, Miami was doing the deep dredge, so there was an opportunity there for trade, and the Panama Canal was reversing in 2015. So Miami was positioning itself to be like Singapore, which, if you know Singapore's stories, it's a huge opportunity for economic growth and viability of all levels of society. And a real way to start to rethink and think about expanding the supply chain. So I went to Miami. I started EcoTech. It was amazing.
Hold on. Pandwe, I just have to call out, because you say it like, okay, so so there was a need for me in DC. I went to DC and and then I saw it up. So here's something, because it's something for our listeners to learn. Okay, when we're called for something, we have a choice, and we're laid out with many choices. And I think in everything that's going on in the world right now, it's presenting many choices for all of us.
Of course.
In these choices is we can or we can't. We could find all the reasons we can't do something. We could find all the hardship, all the obstacles, everything that stops us. And you're a woman who said, wow, here's an opportunity. I can step into it. I will step into it. And I'm, just picking up yourself and moving is not as easy as it just bypasses, You know, there's.
Oh no, I had bought a house in DC, a brownstone in Columbia Heights. I moved my sister up and I packed my car and drove south.
Yeah. So I think, you know, the leaders of today and tomorrow listening to the call, I want you to hear and understand, you know, what Pandwe is representing today and what she's sharing is a woman who is determined, a woman who not only feels the innovation, but sees the opportunity and doesn't blink an eye and steps into it. Mm-hmm. And that is a huge, huge learning lesson in leadership.
Thank you
for sharing.
Thank you for saying that. You're right. Sometimes when it's like a calling, you don't feel like you have a choice. And as I said before, between Hurricane Katrina and the shoes that my ancestors left, my mom still lives in the lower Life Ward. I mean, my sister still lives in New Orleans with my 3 nephews. There's no way that I can stop until these issues are addressed. And I fundamentally believe supply chain is the way to do that. And I think that everything around us presents itself as an opportunity for our success or our failure, and we can learn from our failures to be successful.
Yeah, I always say there is no such thing as failures. They're learning curves along the way. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They're the greatest lessons we'll ever learn. So you mobilized in Miami, here we come. And you know, in your miraculous and amazing and leadership story here. So you land in Miami. Mm-hmm. Where does, I'll try to get this out in English, Ecosystems, EcoVisions get started now?
Okay, so I land in Miami. I actually took a couple of consulting jobs first to just model that I learned at Harvard. So Harvard taught me how to take something from one to many. So I started scaling different types of businesses to see if this skill translated to different industries. So I scaled a financial service firm from one to many, a dental office. My sister's a dentist, so I had some background in that. And I wanted to see, is this something that I could apply to different sectors while I'm framing the framework of the sectors that I think could have the most unicornish or disruptive growth in the market, which is EcoTech. So as soon as I had the right connections, right relationships, and could lease a space of my own and get things started, I put $250,000 of my own money into the framework of EcoTech. I opened the first space. And within 6 months, we had 16 companies.
6 months. So again, let's look at the numbers. So yes. you invested your own capital.
Yes.
Okay. And in 6 months, you went from some 6 months to 16.
Yes. And it was
innovators.
Intense because the space nearest to us, so Miami was a young emerging market at the time. Tech was not huge here at the time, and definitely not green tech or sustainable tech, right? At the time, at least people thought, right? And there was a space that had opened a couple years before called the Lab Miami. The founders were supporters of mine, and they took 6 months before they got their first company. So as you can imagine, which is typical for co-working, right? And they had some big, heavy-hitting developers behind them, right? And dollars behind them to the millions, to the tunes of millions, right? And so everybody was like, okay, wait, who was this girl, right? So we ended up getting a lot of press from the Huffington Post, Herald Magazine, Miami Herald, Times Magazine, etc. And from there, we got our first investor. She came in, a woman investor, came in, and well, this is another, I guess, perseverance story, but just because you have the money does not mean that you can own in some places in this country. So I put down a 10% on a $1.5 million building. That is actually now our headquarters, and the owner and the realtor conspired to keep my deposit. Yes. And
really?
Yes. And I learned later that this was a scam that they do here in Miami. You have a lot of foreign investors, non-sophisticated in the marketplace investors coming in. And so this is just a scam that they do. And they take people's money and you don't have a recourse, right, to get your deposit back. And so I met with this angel who we came up with the plan for her to straw buy my building underneath me. So they have to release my deposit, straw bought cash. And then she injected $500,000 for me to be able to grow out the business. It was amazing. And if you can imagine, when they found out I actually owned the building and was operating, they were very surprised.
Right, because unfortunately people, and it's not always a woman, it's not always the age, it's not always the foreign, they have a profile of who they feel they could be taking advantage of. And it's not just women, it's not just young people, it's not just foreign people in Miami. It was a bunch of people along that profile staff.
Mm-hmm.
And most people don't think, they just say, oh dear, what am I going to do? You didn't go into the woe's me moment. You went into, how do I take action here?
Oh yeah, as an entrepreneur, people constantly try to find a way to get what you have, and you've got to protect it so that you can grow. And relationships are everything. And having
Repeat that.
Relationships are everything. I mean, literally the most important thing in growing a business, having thought partners to bounce ideas after, having the ability to get good people on the team. It's the only way to grow and scale. And unfortunately, or fortunately, right, because it's just part of the growing pains, you have to learn that the hard way. I don't think there's a way to not get bumps and bruises as you grow a business. I mean, for me, how I mitigated is I try to, I'm a researcher and I'm a scientist. So I try to follow methods, follow procedures, not reinvent every wheel, so that the things that I do iterate, I can track them and monitor the impact that they have.
So when I said repeat it, because the listeners who fall in regularly know how passionate I am. And my recent book, my book in the last year, talks about the value of relationships and it being the cornerstone, the golden ticket in every business and every leader. And so and without being prompted, you know, and guys, I don't say this so you say, hey, go buy my book. I say this so go reach out to your relationships. There's the value. That's what's important here, is understanding the relationships, because that's the greatest thing we have to leverage for all growth of us as human beings, as well as our businesses and the greatest things in our lives.
Yeah, agreed, definitely.
So Miami, and so 6 months, 16 businesses in your incubator. You bought the building.
Yes.
Yeah,
so we
went from, where are you today?
Yeah, so we went from 2,000 square feet to 52,000 square feet, that building, and we got another building, partnerships with cities, things grew from there. And so from there, I went to MIT to frame the model and make sure that it was the right thing to be able to develop out, and that it really was going to meet the larger purpose. So remembering that I'm doing this because my mom still lives in the lower Ninth Ward, and because 90% of the city that I call home was underwater. And while at MIT, learning that it was not even being looked at as an opportunity for viability as an innovation hub, nor Miami, nor many of these low-lying places, because all science says it's over for these places, according to the IPCC and the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals out of the UN. Low-lying areas in the US, like New Orleans and Miami, have less than 12 years to sustain in the current on the current trajectory we have as it relates to pollution and climate and climate pollution. And so really understanding that problem and understanding that a solution is necessary. While at MIT, I worked with Simon Johnson, and his research identified the best places for the development of innovation hubs throughout the US. He identifies through his book, Jumpstarting America, 102 locations that are best for the development of innovation hubs. And again, I'm a researcher and I'm a good cook, so I know how to follow a recipe. I created a model that can scale not only to those 102 domestic locations, but to another 48 international, creating micro manufacturing plants for entrepreneurs to work at and produce. So my trick or my solution or my innovation, if you will, is that most entrepreneurs don't need a desk. Most entrepreneurs want to make things. America became great because we made stuff. And most of the entrepreneurs who come through my door, from the company that made solar power beach umbrellas, right? They didn't call them green tech, but they just are a perfect company for Miami, to the company that creates living wall installation, to the company that makes utensils out of bioresins, which can completely offset the plastic and packaging market and immediately drop our carbon production just by ramping up production. But we don't have that in America right now because we currently outsource most of our products from China, right? Which we're seeing now in the supply chain reality is a major problem that
right.
we
So
wanted
that's
to
going to bring us back to the supply chain conversation now.
Exactly. And that's what EcoTech is. It's an innovation on supply chain by disrupting the entire framework and making it a microsystems framework.
So let's look at a layman's example here.
Okay.
So I could reference a cup of coffee in the morning, just because, morning Joe here.
Mm-hmm.
How can the work that you're doing, and when we look at supply chain, whether it be, a Starbucks to Coffee World, right,
Mm-hmm.
Pete's, whatever we're looking at, right?
Right.
Let's look at the supply chain that's current to what we can be doing in the supply chain.
Okay, perfect. So concrete example would be, what are those cups made from? And where are they made and produced?
So
Supply
what are
chain
they
is
made?
about the source product.
Okay, so I'm just going to repeat so everybody's getting this. We're looking at what they're made of and where they're made.
Exactly. And if they're made within 100 to 150 miles of the production site, you can immediately reduce cost and reduce pollution in the environment by producing on a local level. So think of us kind of like Kinko's, but instead of printing paper, you can print products.
So interestingly enough, for the past 20, 30 plus years, right, using round numbers and not data numbers, we believed that if we outsource globally, right, outside the United States, it is cheaper, it's cheaper, it's cheaper. Outsource outside the United States, it's cheaper. Go get your X from China, your Y from, the Middle East, from Pakistan, from, India, wherever we're looking, right?
Mm-hmm.
How is it we can shift the belief system based on the data that
Yes.
to actually keeping things local and help our country now?
So there are two answers to that question. One, part of why I went to MIT. MIT is number one in sustainability, number one in digital currency initiative. I dabbled in astrophysics while I was there, so they happen to be number one in that also, and in supply chain management, right? So as it relates to sustainability, there is a body of research and real-time data about the 5 verticals that we focus on, which briefly are space tech, so terraforming products, green tech, which is consumer products, things made from plastic, farm tech, which is the future of food, everything that you want to consume, energy tech, so battery storage, battery distribution, everything in that space, and health tech, right? The areas and the products that we need to live all fit in those 5 categories. There's a body of research that shows that localized production, and production that reduced. So think about think about you going to ship off a product or wanting to produce something. Are you produce something even in your house? What's your number one and most expensive cost? Getting it from point A to point B.
Right.
And the closer it is, the easier it is, the cheaper it is. Now,
so
what has changed?
Go ahead. If we're looking at, so hold on. So if you're looking at it simply right now, so when we buy things from our local farm stands versus going to the big markets,
yes.
right? How much easier, simpler, it's fresher. Exactly. It's less expensive because and we're not using the gas or an electric, et cetera, et cetera. So that's taking the concept and looking at it simply.
Yes, and translating it to other areas. So a farm stand is a B2C market, a business to consumer market. So you're getting discount on your vegetables for your house. But how do you translate that to the volume that a grocery store needs or the volume that a restaurant needs? That's what we're providing, B2B. And then you're only talking about one of the 5 verticals in that example, farm tech, the future of food. How do you translate that to the actual packaging? Millennials, Gen X, Gen Z have already said that they want products that are more sustainable. So don't sell them a healthy granola bar and put it in oil packaging. We don't want it. We don't want it. You've got to put it in a sustainable material, and that currently doesn't exist in the US market at volume. So the market's already asking for it. We just get to supply that on a regional level so that we can get the cost and the price point down to something that is useful for consumers.
That's understandable. That right now we can really see it, understand, and relate. So what has surprised you with all of this?
Well, one of the really exciting things that surprised me is that the market is actually calling for it finally. So I think when I started this, I wasn't so sure. It's one thing to research something. It's another thing to have it kind of turn out, right? And so to have people gravitate, to see people literally if you turn on the news right now, and I've been talking about supply chain for half a decade now, but you turn on the news now and it's not a station that you don't hear something about our broken supply chain in the past month, right? But what if we actually implemented solutions so that we could have the clean water and the clean air and have the products and items that we need to maintain the quality of life that we want at the same time? And I think people are starting to wrap their mind around through technology. Through supply chain innovation using technology, it's possible because what technology brings is innovation. And what we're bringing is the innovation through the tech to the supply chain. And most people haven't been thinking about it that way. If you look at the big guys, like the head of FedEx, who I got to hear at a major conference in October, he was speaking about supply chain, and everybody quoted this even in Davos. So in Davos, Switzerland, they were talking about, the supply chain industry is a $50 trillion industry, 50 trillion. So we're leaving a lot of money on the table and we're polluting the planet at the same time. Why? Why would we do that? And if you look at his solution or any of the big tech company solution, all of their solutions are either battery improvements, right? So we're going to create a better battery, which is cool, but that means we're still using the same systems of roads and cars, etc. Or automation. So we'll just get automated driving systems, but you're still using the roads. That's not supply chain innovation and disruption. That's not what the shared economy business model brought us. What we're doing is taking the tech models that work, like the shared economy model, and applying it to manufacturing. That's our innovation. And it makes sense, right? If you're not trucking the item across from Miami to Chicago, and I'll make this super concrete. We have a company called Earthware. They make utensils out of bioresins. Those bioresins are corn, potato, sugar, right? You've seen them everywhere. We'll take that same company, let's say they're producing in Miami and they're going after a cruise ship, right? Talking about millions of dollars just on forks and spoons. But then they decide they want to get in business in Chicago. That entrepreneur doesn't have to ship the product on ground from Miami to Chicago. What they do is they get on a plane, they take their source product, They go to Chicago and they produce 50 million units without shipping anything. Well, now they can cut their price point because they didn't have to ship by ground. That same entrepreneur cannot get on the plane at all and decide, hey, I'm going to ship that source file to EcoTech Buenos Aires, Argentina. And not only did they not have to brave air traffic, but their product ends up in Buenos Aires and they can produce 50 million units there without the cost of production. They didn't have to figure out maritime laws. They didn't have to figure out ground shipping. They didn't have to figure out a lot. They didn't have to bring a whole team from one site to another site. And they can still do sales and still do production of their products because of the satellite model of manufacturing run by robots. So it's distributive smart manufacturing with an on-time marketplace with AI robotic information.
So in looking for our listeners today, you know, we've covered an enormous amount. What are some one or two simple tips for the innovators of tomorrow, for the leaders of today, that you have learned as a business leader yourself?
It's a $50 trillion industry. So there is room for everybody to play, but people have to educate themselves on the opportunities that are available right now. So I want to give two major resources. One, Venture Bee, an article that came out a couple weeks ago. It's called Why Unicorns Love Recession. Right? So while everybody's worried about the recession, there's a unique opportunity right now to take advantage of the fact that on everybody's lips is, oh my God, the supply chain is broken. Now, where are the solutions? The solutions have been outlined in an article by IBM. IBM outlines the 5 frameworks or the 5 technologies that are the underpinnings of supply chain, and those are, in order, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, blockchain, intelligent order management, and quantum computing. Now, the last 2 require some heavy investment and heavy support, but the first 3 are the AI, Internet of Things, and blockchain. There's huge swaths of information available about how you can engage in that. And a resource to engage in all of this is Miami DevCon. So Miami DevCon, which is miamidevcon.com, is taking place April 16th and 17th. It is a virtual conference where people can find out all about and from the industry experts all about these 5 areas of opportunity in supply chain. And I would implore your listeners and anybody who is interested in taking advantage of this $50 trillion industry to start to educate themselves, okay, on what is the main technology that goes into supply chain and how can I start a business in this space, because this is the space of the future.
So, Dr. Gibson, how can our listeners, yes, we're going to share the resource of miamidevcon.com. How can our listeners know more about you, follow you, give us some resources? You gave an enormous amount of information, a lively conversation, which I have a page of notes just for my own interests. How can we follow you, know more about you?
That's so funny. So while I am a millennial, I am not on social media.
Oh my goodness, you're kidding.
But I will be speaking at Miami DevCon. So if people participate in Miami DevCon, they can find out more and hear more about the work that I do there. There's also, I have my own site where I post speaking engagements and things like that. It's just pandwegibson.com. And I'm on LinkedIn.
So you are on, so yes, there's a woman.
Well,
right.
I have a presence page and I post once, maybe every couple weeks. But I'm not really, I have pages for all of them, but I'm going to be honest about my participation in them. I like to create more than boast. And I think I shared about my ancestors that I'm so far from the goal that I want to kind of wait until I get some level of success before I start talking about it, if that makes sense to you.
Well, you have achieved an enormous amount. And thank you for taking time out of an incredibly busy schedule, especially before an event, to educate our listeners, to share more of your leadership story, and to see what we can be doing as leaders, getting things accomplished, making a difference, and not seeing this as what is going on presently as an obstacle, but for an avenue of possibility and where we're going from here. So thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I remember where I saw the CEO of FedEx. He was at TechCrunch in October. If people want to look up that talk also.
Awesome.
Thank you for having me.
Listeners, remember to leave us a note. Let us know what were your biggest takeaways, what impacted you from today's interviewing. Why we ask is so we can give you more of what you want to hear. Remember to hit subscribe. We come into your inbox every Monday morning. Thanks again for joining us here today at Her Success Story.